The smell of pine needles is a specific thing. It is sharp, clean, and cold, sitting high in the nose. In the Bavarian forest just outside region, the air in October tastes like wet iron and decaying leaves. A scent that clears the mind and settles the heart. I remember the silence of the forest floor, the way the moss swallowed, the sound of my boots, making me a ghost in my own home. I was 23, but in that memory, I feel ancient, carved from the same wood as the trees. I was tracking a stag, a massive creature with antlers like driftwood, and I knew exactly where he would step before he knew it himself. The wind was my brother then. It told me secrets. It told me where to wait. I was the master of that world, a predator in harmony with the silence. But memory is a liar. It paints the past in oils, smoothing over the rough canvas of truth. Perhaps that day never happened. Perhaps I invented the stag and the silence to survive what came next. Because the reality, the only reality that mattered in the summer of 1943, was the smell of diesel, stale sweat, and the acrid, metallic taste of fear. There is no silence in a Panzer IV. Even when the engine is idling, the beast vibrates. A low-frequency trembling that works its way through the soles of your boots, up your shins, and settles in your teeth. We were sitting on the steppe, somewhere near Prokhorovka, though the names of these Russian towns had long since lost their meaning to us. They were just coordinates on a map, places to kill or be killed. The heat inside the hull was suffocating. It was a physical weight, pressing against the chest. The sun beat down on the steel plating, turning the interior into an oven. We were baking in our own juices, me, Vogel, Schmidt, the whole lot of us. I looked at my hands. They were stained with grease and grime, the fingernails black crescents. These were not the hands of a hunter anymore. They were the hands of a mechanic, a laborer, a servant to the machine. I tried to summon the feeling of the rifle stock against my cheek, the rough wood warm and familiar. But all I could feel was the cold, vibrating steel of the periscope handles. Vogel, our commander, was drumming his fingers against the rim of the cupola. It was a nervous tic he had developed over the last few weeks. He didn't know he was doing it, but the sound, flesh against metal, echoed in the cramped fighting compartment like a clock ticking down the seconds of our lives. I wanted to scream at him to stop. I wanted to reach up and break his fingers. But I said nothing. We were all trapped in this iron coffin together, bound by a terrifying intimacy that was closer than marriage. We knew the smell of each other's farts, the sound of each other's nightmares, the specific cadence of each other's breathing. There was a bolt near my left knee, part of the turret ring assembly. It was loose, just a fraction of a millimeter, but enough that the vibration of the engine made it squeak. It was a high-pitched rhythmic sound that drilled into my skull. It sounded like a mouse trapped in a wall, desperate and dying. That bolt became the focus of my entire existence. If I stared at it long enough, maybe the walls wouldn't feel like they were closing in. My greatest fear was not death. Death is simple. In the forest, death is just the end of a cycle. The stag dies, the wolves eat, the grass grows. It is clean. But here my fear was the hatch. I had seen what happens when a shell strikes the hull at the wrong angle, warping the metal, fusing the escape hatches shut. I had seen men screaming behind thick glass blocks, their faces melting as the ammunition cooked off, trapped in a burning cage of their own making. The thought made my throat constrict. I checked the latch above me. Then I checked it again, and a third time. It was unlocked, but my mind whispered that it wouldn't matter. If the fire came, the fire would win. Richter Vogel's voice crackled through the throat mic, distorted and tinny. Quit staring at the wall. Eyes up. Jowl, I muttered, pressing my face back to the optics. The view outside was a slit of the world, a narrow, rectangular slice of gray-brown nothingness. The Russian steppe is a terrible place for a man who loves the forest. There is no cover, no trees to hide behind, no ridges to mask your approach. Just miles and miles of flat, indifferent earth, stretching out to a horizon that feels like the edge of the world. It made me feel naked, exposed. In the forest, I could disappear. Here I was a dark smudge on a blank page, waiting to be erased. The radio squawked, a harsh burst of static that made us all jump. Then came the voice, distinct and metallic, stripping away the last remnants of the ordinary world. It was the order. The waiting was over. Panzer IV, Vogel said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the nervous edge. The waiting was the worst part. The action was a relief. The driver, brave, stupid hands, revved the engine. The Maybach HL 120 roared, a dragon waking up in a cave. The entire tank lurched forward, the tracks biting into the dry earth with a groan of tortured metal. The loose bolt near my knee screamed in protest, but it was drowned out by the cacophony of the machine. We were moving. We crested a small rise, the tracks clattering over the dry scrub. And there it was. The horizon was burning. It looked like the gates of hell had been flung open. Columns of black smoke rose like pillars supporting the sky. The earth itself seemed to be boiling, and moving through the smoke, like a swarm of iron beetles, were hundreds of tanks. Ours, theirs. It was impossible to tell from this distance. It was just a churning mass of violence. We were not individuals anymore. We were not men. We were a single cell in a massive, dying organism, rolling down the slope toward the fire. I tried to read the land as we descended, my eyes scanning the terrain out of habit. In the Bavarian forest, the land speaks to you. A dip in the ground means water. A cluster of birds taking flight means a predator is moving. The way the grass bends tells you the wind direction. I looked for these signs now, desperate for some advantage, some secret knowledge that would keep us alive. But the steppe was mute. The grass was crushed under the treads of 1,000 machines. The birds had fled long ago. The wind carried only the stench of cordite and burning oil. My mentor, the forest, had abandoned me. The rules I had lived by, patience, silence, observation, were useless here. There was no stalking this prey. We were charging headlong into a brawl, bludgeoning each other with hammers in an open field. Target, 11 o'clock. Distance 800, Vogel shouted, the calm gone, replaced by the frantic energy of the hunt. I traversed the turret. The hydraulic whine was loud, piercing. Through the sight, the world was magnified and shaky. I saw them, T-34s. They moved with a crude, terrifying grace, their sloped armor shedding the light. They looked like ugly green toads swarming over the earth. Armor-piercing loaded, the loader screamed, slamming the breech shut. The sound was like a bank vault closing. Fire, I pressed the pedal. The sensation of firing the main gun inside the tank is not a sound. It is a pressure chain. It feels like someone has slapped you on both ears simultaneously while punching you in the chest. The air inside the turret instantly turned bitter with fumes. The casing clattered to the floor, smoking and hot. Hit, Vogel yelled. I looked through the sight. We had struck the light tank. It didn't explode. It didn't fly apart. It just stopped. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the engine deck. Then, a second later, a jet of flame erupted from the commander's hatch, vertical and violent, like a blowtorch. I watched for a movement, for a man to climb out. Nothing. I felt nothing. No triumph. No thrill of the hunt. In the forest, killing the stag was a sacred act. There was respect. Here it was just geometry. Ballistics and armor thickness. We had solved the equation before they did. That was all. Reload. Target. 2 o'clock. The battle swallowed us. It ceased to be a sequence of events and became a blur of sensory overload. The hull rang constantly with the impact of small arms fire and shrapnel, like hail on a tin roof. Every time a shell landed near us, the ground shocked through us against the hard edges of the interior. I was bruised, deafened, and soaked in sweat. To our left, a Panzer IV from our platoon, I think it was Weber's tank, was advancing alongside us. We had shared coffee with Weber that morning. He had shown me a picture of his daughter. I glanced through the vision block just as a Soviet shell caught them. It wasn't like the movies. There was no slow motion. 1 second, the tank was a terrifying war machine. The next, the turret was spinning through the air, detached from the hull, riding a pillar of fire. The ammunition had detonated. The explosion was so bright it seared my retinas, even through the thick glass. Driver hard right. Flank them, Vogel was screaming, his voice cracking. I couldn't look away from Weber's burning hull. It was my nightmare made manifest. The iron coffin. There was no way anyone survived that. They were gone, vaporized. The picture of the daughter, the coffee, the jokes, all turned to ash in a fraction of a second. Richter, traverse right. Traverse right, I shook my head, forcing the image away, forcing my hands to work the controls. The turret groaned as I spun it. The T-34s were closing in. A wave of grain steel. They were faster than us. They were everywhere. The tank lurched violently, throwing me against the gun breech. The world outside tilted crazily. A sound like the sky tearing apart filled the cabin, followed by a shriek of tortured metal, so loud it felt like a needle being driven into my ear canal. The tank spun, the rear slewing around as the momentum carried us forward, but the tracks refused to follow. We stopped. The engine was still roaring, but we weren't moving. Drag. We lost a track, Hans screamed from the driver's seat. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. We were immobile, a sitting duck on the open plain. Through the periscope, I watched the rest of our company continue the advance, their exhaust plumes fading into the dust. They were leaving us, and then I saw the T-34s. 3 of them. They had been moving parallel to us, but now, seeing our crippled state, they slowed. Their turrets began to rotate. The long barrels pivoted, distinct and dark against the smoke, turning slowly, inevitably, until they were pointing directly at my face. Smoke, I screamed, the word tearing at my throat. Raw and desperate. Pop smoke now. I didn't wait for the lieutenant to find his voice. I didn't wait for the order. My boot slammed against the kick switch for the smoke dischargers. A dull thud reverberated through the hull, and seconds later, a wall of white phosphorus bloomed in front of the vision block. It was a thick chemical fog, blinding and suffocating, but it was the only thing between us and the armor-piercing rounds sitting in the breeches of those T-34s. Reverse, I yelled at Hans. Back us into the tree line. Go, go, the engine howled, a wounded beast protesting the strain. The tank shuddered, the metal groaning as the single good track bit into the earth, dragging the dead weight of the severed side. We slewed backward, a crippled crab retreating into the shadows. A shell whistled past where we had been a second before, the shockwave rocking the chassis. But the smoke held. We were ghosts fading into the gray. We hit the tree line with a violent crunch of timber. Pine branches whipped against the hull, scratching the steel like fingernails. We were out of the kill zone, but we were crippled. Engine off, I whispered. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The ringing in my ears was a high-pitched scream. Inside the turret, the air was thick with the smell of cordite, fear, and the acrid stench of burnt rubber. The lieutenant was shaking, his face pale, eyes wide and unseeing. He was a boy from Berlin who knew parades and maps, not the mud and the blood of the East. We have to abandon it, the lieutenant stammered, his hand fumbling for the hatch latch. We have to run. The company is retreating. We can catch them on foot. I grabbed his wrist. My grip was iron. If we run across that open ground, we are dead men. The Ivans will hunt us down like rabbits in a field. We stay with the tank. We fix the track. It's suicide, it's survival, I snapped, my voice low and hard. I wasn't a Jeff Freighter anymore. I wasn't a subordinate. In the woods, rank didn't matter. In the woods, there are only those who know the land and those who die in it. We fix the track. Then we go deep. Not back to the road. Into the forest. We worked like madmen. Hans and I slipped out the escape hatch, dropping into the mud. The air was cold, biting at our sweat-soaked uniforms. We could hear the distant rumble of the battle, the dull thuds of the slaughter happening miles away. But here, under the canopy of the pines, it was terrifyingly quiet. We used the sledgehammer and the track jacks, our movements frantic but precise. My knuckles were bleeding, skin stripped away by rusted steel. But I felt no pain, only the urgency. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot. 30 minutes. It felt like 30 years. When the final pin was hammered home, I was gasping, my lungs burning. We scrambled back inside, sealing the hatch just as the sound of engines drifted on the wind. Russian engines. Diesel, close. Start it, I commanded. Keep the RPMs low. Crawl. The lieutenant looked at the map. The road is that way. Richter, we have to rejoin the column. I snatched the map from his hands and crumpled it. The column is dead. The road is a shooting gallery. Look at the terrain. Look at the trees. I pointed to the dense thicket of the Bavarian-like forest ahead. A dark tangled mass of green and brown. We go there. That's enemy territory, he whispered. That's cover, I replied. We drove into the green dark. And that was when the soldier in me died. And the trapper woke up. I forgot the tactical manuals. I forgot the formations. I became what I was before the war. I guided hands not by coordinates, but by the lay of the land. I watched the flight of the crows. If they circled, it was clear. If they bolted, men were below. I read the mud like a book. The deep ruts of a truck meant a supply line. The fresh snap of a sapling meant a patrol. We moved the 25-ton machine as if it were a stalking cat. We hugged the depressions in the earth, using the shadows of the tall pines to break up our silhouette. The engine temperature was climbing, the needle hovering in the red. The radiator was damaged. We were pushing a dying horse. Stop, I hissed. Kill the engine. Richter, we can't stop. The lieutenant pleaded. Kill it, hands cut the ignition. The beast shuddered and died. The silence rushed back in, absolute and suffocating. Why, the lieutenant breathed. Listen. At first, nothing. Then, the snap of dry wood. The murmur of voices. Not German. They emerged from the tree line 50 meters away. A Soviet infantry patrol. 12 men. Submachine guns slung over their shoulders. Relaxed. Confident. They were walking right across our front. We were camouflaged with branches and mud. A mound of earth in the twilight, but we were massive. If they looked, really looked, they would see the muzzle brake of the 75 gun protruding from the brush. Don't move, I mouthed to the crew. Don't breathe. The terror was a cold hand squeezing my heart. This was my nightmare. The metal coffin. If they saw us, a single grenade down the barrel, a Molotov on the engine deck, and we would burn. I would die trapped in this steel box, cooking like meat in an oven. My hand hovered over the trigger of the coaxial MG-34. I could cut them down. I could kill them all in 3 seconds. But the noise would bring the tanks. It would bring the Sturmoviks. One of the Russians stopped. He was close, so close I could see the dirt under his fingernails through my vision slit. He was young, his face smudged with soot. He leaned back. He leaned against our track. The hull vibrated slightly with his weight. Inside, the crew was frozen. Hans had his hands clamped over his mouth. The lieutenant was weeping silently, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. I stared through the thick glass, locking eyes with the back of the enemy's head. The Russian fished a pack of cigarettes from his tunic. He struck a match. The flare was blinding in the gloom. He inhaled, blowing a stream of blue smoke that drifted into our ventilation intake. I smelled the tobacco. It smelled like life. It smelled like death. He shifted his white. The lighter slipped from his fingers. It fell into the mud, right next to the vision port. Time stopped. The universe contracted to that small brass rectangle in the mud. The Russian turned. He bent down. His face filled my field of view. I saw the pores of his skin. I saw the fatigue in his eyes. He reached for the lighter, his gaze sweeping across the glass block. He was looking right at me. My finger tightened on the trigger. The spring tension increased. 1 millimeter more. Just one. I prepared to unleash hell. I prepared to die. He grabbed the lighter. He paused. He squinted. He saw his own reflection in the dark glass, a distorted, muddy face staring back from the monster. He didn't see the German tank commander. He didn't see the fear. He just saw the forest reflecting itself. He stood up, brushed the mud from the brass, and turned away. He said something to his comrade, a laugh that sounded jagged in the quiet air. Then he walked on. I didn't exhale for 10 minutes. We waited until nightfall. The moon rose, a hunter's moon, pale and indifferent. We moved under the cover of darkness, creeping through the woods, the engine barely turning over. We navigated by the stars and the smell of the damp earth. We were no longer fighting a war. We were escaping a hunt. By dawn the trees thinned. We saw the gray shapes of Est, KFZ half-tracks, iron crosses. We rolled into the assembly area as the sun broke the horizon. The engine finally gave out, seizing with a metallic shriek just as we crossed the perimeter. We fell out of the hatches, stumbling, deaf, covered in oil and filth. An Oberleutnant ran up to us, clipboard in hand, looking at our battered Panzer like it was a ghost. "Unit," he barked. "Third Panzer," I croaked. "Second company." He stopped writing. He looked at the lieutenant, then at me. He looked past us, scanning the tree line we had just emerged from. "Where are the rest?" he asked. I looked back at the forest. It stood silent, a wall of green guarding its secrets. I thought of Weber. I thought of the pillar of fire. I thought of the Russian smoking his cigarette, unaware he had been leaning on his own death. "There are no rest." I said, "We are it." The words tasted like ash. We were the sole survivors. The harvest was over, and we were the only stalks left standing in a burnt field. That was 40 years ago. I live in the Bavarian forest now, not far from where I was born. I walk these woods every day. The tourists, they see the beauty. They see the hiking trails and the vistas. They walk loudly, talking, laughing, stomping their boots. I cannot drive a car. I haven't been behind the wheel of a vehicle since that morning in 1943. The thought of closing a door, of being strapped into a seat, makes my chest tight. I can't breathe in small rooms. I need the sky. I need to know I can run. I am a hunter who no longer hunts. I sold my rifles. I removed the traps from the shed. In the forest, a loud man is a dead man. You learn to watch, to listen, to be small. We went to Russia with loud engines and loud guns, thinking we were the apex predators. We thought steel made us invincible. But in the deep woods, I remembered what it felt like to be prey. I learned that the machine is a lie. The armor is a lie. The only truth is the silence. The only victory is the breath you take when the enemy has passed you by. I look at my hands sometimes, old and spotted now, and I can still feel the cold steel of the trigger. I can still smell the Russian tobacco. I was a trapper by trade, trained to catch the wolf. But I learned that day that when you build a machine to kill, you are not the trapper. You are the bait inside the iron box. The trap was never meant for the enemy. The trap was meant for us. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.